Michelle.
Daniel.
OG Rose.
And today we're going to be talking about priority versus compounding. We were talking about this over dinner a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think this is a really interesting topic because it impacts our daily lives and how we view getting things done even, you know? I mean, I think that's a big that's a big thing that comes to people's mind when they think about their time. It's just, what do I have to get done? What do I want to get done?
Right.
What do I want to accomplish? And then there's just the bigger questions of like dreams and goals and stuff like that and how you go about achieving them.
Oh yeah, I mean, a lot of people talk about what do you prioritize. You need to prioritize things. What are your priorities? And, there's truth to that. It's important to be able to prioritize to determine what matters, what doesn't matter, what you should focus on, and what you should not focus on. But what's really interesting is how that can also bring a sort of moral hierarchy, where, what is most important to you. And that can actually kind of get in the way of discerning what you want, what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and also cause a lot of existential anxiety as well, because you kind of get into a situation where you're made to feel that what matters to you is what you use your time on. Therefore, if you're not using your time on why, it means you must not care about why. But maybe you're just not doing why because the kids are crawling, on your back and, the car is broken down or something like that. You can't necessarily say that just because a person uses their time doing X doesn't mean they don't care at all about why. But the conflation of, say, prioritizing, which then gets a moral kind of coloring to it, and that prioritizing can be connected with how one uses your time leads to an entire moral system that I think can really hinder people in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. It is so true that the language of prioritizing, does tend to start to moralize, what people choose to do with their time. And I think I wonder if that's because priorities tend to think of things almost more in the abstraction and the completion of stuff. Whereas when you think about doing things with just the compounding effect, right? There's compounding effect would be the difference of how those would maybe operate in terms of our language of them and then the practice. The compounding is to do a little bit of something every day, or just do it consistently enough that you're building something,
Right.
It doesn't have to be some hyper structured thing of like, I do 10 minutes of this at this time of day every day, but just to kind of do it more or less every day at some point in the day, or whatever, every other day, every week, where you're building on it. You're building on it, and you always know that you kind of get back to that as something you do a little bit of, right? So that you work on this project or goal or whatever it is.
Right.
So that's a compounding effect or the compounding practice.
Right.
The prioritization, I think that the way that looks will probably, I guess what I want to say is that it's interesting because the language is used like just to know that if you prioritize something, suddenly it's like done.
Yeah.
It's just very strange. It's like it probably both in practice might kind of look similar, but I think there's a different orientation towards them, and because of the abstraction of priorities, and there's almost this completed feeling. Like you think about a priority more in terms of something you're already doing or you've already done or something like that.
Right.
There's almost like you're thinking more about the completed goal than the process or something.
Oh, sure.
But then I think it almost makes it even harder to actually do the baby steps of getting that done, because everything will take baby steps to get done.
Yeah, right.
We always forget that. Everything will take baby steps to get done.
Well, it's interesting. There's a few things. So there seems to be a difference between priority as in the ability to prioritize what matters in an immediate decision, which is an important skill.
One I don't have. No,
it's a very difficult skill. Nobody has it. It's a difficult skill. But the ability to very quickly analyze the situation to determine that X is more important than Y. You need to make a choice now between X and Y. Yes. And so you choose X. So that really immediate decision making. But
that is a good skill. And people do that. We do that every day. You have to evaluation. There's evaluations, right?
Sure, and decision making. But what's interesting is very often the word priority is used in two different senses. senses. So you have that sense, the ability to prioritize in making a decision and making it, especially quickly. But then there's this kind of use of the term prioritize, which is more of a kind of life map, a kind of direction of what you should do with your life and what you should not do with your life. And both of them are kind of treated the same, but I think they're very different senses. Because again, no one is disputing the ability to prioritize in a discernment situation being really, really critical. But you see, when you think about like, oh, okay, I'm going to prioritize my business, for example. You say, I really want my business to do well. Okay, well, that's very good. But the issue is, what does it mean to prioritize your business? Does that mean an hour a day or 2 hours a day? Why not 2 hours a day? What if you can only get 15 minutes in because you're working on your entrepreneurship while you're also working at Food Line or at another business, right? You know, what constitutes prioritization? It seems very open-ended. It feels very unclear. Also, I wanted to comment on your point. I think it's kind of hard to think of a priority as something you sustain every single day constantly. Priority has this kind of flashy sound to it, like a signal. So it's either something you just did or you're done. It has a kind of check mark
It has
sound.
like a badge feeling to
Yes,
it. It sounds like, I prioritize this. And so therefore I've got this badge. This badge that says I prioritize this thing. Like I value it.
Absolutely.
And I think, and that's why it's like, it feels more of this, again, it feels more of an abstraction. And therefore I think sometimes it actually doesn't always equip us just in the language of it to know how that actually... How do you actually prioritize something in practice?
It's almost like often with prioritization, it's like, oh, my identity is I prioritize my business. And that you have your identity and people start applauding you for doing that. And so you get the social status. So then you never do anything with your business. Because you kind of receive the prioritization. There is absolutely something about prioritization that can get mixed with, not necessarily, but it can get mixed with identity, virtue signaling, with this kind of sense of I am someone who prioritizes that. I have the right values, therefore, and so I've done what I'm supposed to do. Whereas when you think in terms of compounding, and so the first point I was making is that like prioritizing something doesn't necessarily tell you much. It's not clear what it means to prioritize something, other than a kind of a mental assent that this thing is important. But someone could come along and say, well, you're not prioritizing your entrepreneurship because you only spend 2 hours on it. If you really did, you'd spend 8 hours on it, right? It's very open-ended. Whereas, and it can also have the pitfall of being a kind of virtue signaling. Whereas if you ask the question, am I doing things that have a compounding return? Mm-hmm. As in, when I do it, it has what I gain from doing this thing builds upon what I did yesterday, and then what I do tomorrow builds on what I did today, and there's a building that's sort of going on where you can see that one thing is compounding based on the next. Because then, for example, like let's say you say, oh, I want to really focus on my writing, and you say, well, I can carve out 15 minutes to do writing a day. Well, to a lot of people, they would say, well, that's not prioritizing. That's only 15 minutes. That's not very much. But the truth of the matter is that with all of the demands that life can have, all you might be able to do is 15 minutes. But if you were to do 15 minutes every single day and do it consistently, you can have a compounding effect. And frankly, a compounding strategy can have a different mindset that's more marathon-based, that actually is going to give you the results that you want to get because you have a more realistic discernment. Whereas with prioritization, I think you get into the existential quite quickly because you can always go, am I prioritizing? Am I really prioritizing as much as I am? Am I not doing as much as I could? And you start feeling like you have to make sacrifices. You say, well, I really care about my entrepreneurship. I like writing, but writing is not my priority, so I'm going to stop writing. As opposed to asking the question, what are things that I can do that have a compounding effect on one another and that contribute to an overall purpose or meaning that you're going at? So the compounding mindset can be very different.
I think that you're spot on with all of that, Daniel. Yeah, I think that the prioritizing, it's very strange, and I don't know, maybe it's very particular to how, one's own experiences or what they've heard or whatever, their particular subculture. But there is something about prioritizing that just kind of makes me feel like the sense of, like how do I know how to put it? It's almost like thinking about, wanting the dream job, you get it, and then you're like not happy.
Oh, sure.
Because there's almost this idea, not that you wouldn't necessarily be happy in prioritizing something, but prioritizing because of the very weighty moralization.
Oh yeah.
It can feel like you said, you just never know if you're doing enough.
Oh sure.
So it's not so much that you're not happy. You just sort of feel like, I don't know if I'm doing enough
Right.
to prove that I'm prioritizing this,
Right.
you know?
Because it becomes a signal for other people.
Yes.
Like the function of prioritize, it becomes signaling.
Yes, and often there's kind of this feeling, therefore, it's the sigh feeling is not so much that you're, well, I mean, I guess you could feel unhappy in the sense that you feel like you're never doing enough. You feel never good enough, never, like, or the fact that, like, it might be something that you truly value as a priority in your life, right? But you're kind of comparing how you attend to it versus how other people attend to it or whatever. And then you start
And
thinking,
how you think they think you're attending to it.
Exactly. And then you're like, well, gee, am I prioritizing this enough? And so, yeah, I mean, I think that, again, it just kind of, it's something very strangely, like, large and much more in the ideal realm, about prioritizing, whereas the compounding, which is just, I'm going to do this a little bit every day, is so different because it doesn't actually look at things in terms of it's weird. It's almost like it doesn't make it out to just be this, what are you kind of like, there's something about the compounding that is so much less also in relation to what are other people doing.
Absolutely.
I don't know why. I don't know why the priority language just ends up becoming more of like almost like virtue signaling. It's almost
absolutely
like,
virtue signaling.
Whereas with the compounding, it's almost just because in the almost the nature of this practice itself is to understand that even something very small can have a very significant impact over time, right? Because if we've talked about it before. You write a sentence a day. That's 7 sentences in a week.
Yes.
For the month, you've got a bunch of sentences. Much more than you would if you didn't write anything. And so basically, just like when you realize that you really don't do any comparison because you're just like. Also, you're just more focused on actually getting that work done.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're asking a different question. When you're prioritizing, you're saying, do I prioritize X, which is existential. But when you ask, is X compounding, that's very actual. That's very result-based. It's either getting better or it's not. There's either growth or there isn't. So it's not psychological. Prioritization is psychological. You could have priority and not have success. You could prioritize, you could say, well, I'm going to prioritize my relationships. But then proceed, since you don't know what exactly that means,
right.
You don't say learn about love languages, you don't learn empathy, you don't learn how to listen or different things. So you could very genuinely, in your mind, be prioritizing the relationship and proceed to go in and make the relationship worse because you have intention, but you don't have skill.
Right.
Whereas if you think in terms of I want to get better at relationships and have a little bit every single day, and then what I learned today helps me learn something new tomorrow, which helps me learn something the next day. What you're measuring is the actual quality of the relationship, not your mental intention. Because mental intention is kind of cheap. Intention doesn't really matter. I can intend a lot of things. On the flip side, it's very interesting because when you have this moralization of priority, there's this desire to prove that you have a mental intention. Yeah. But then it becomes performative. And whenever there's performance, there's distraction. And then you just are going through the different social performances to prove that you prioritize something. So people that think you're a good mother or a good worker or a good husband or a good friend or a good writer, a good corporate, whatever it is, and then you prove to other people that you prioritize it. Well, it's kind of like when somebody comes in to measure something, and you know that they're measuring how often you read to your kids or something. Well, then you're going to perform to make sure you pass that metric, right? But then when the person leaves, maybe, or the aunt or whoever, you just go back to not reading anymore, right? Whereas if you think in a compounding mindset, it doesn't matter if other people are over or not, and you're not trying to show off or convince people that your child knows how to read a book. You're instead asking the question, is the child getting better at reading each day a little bit? You're actually focused not on the performative element, you're focused on the actual task, and if there's growth and development. And what's so funny is that actually that's kind of like hard. It sounds kind of harder and more kind of practical and kind of stern in a way. It's like, what are the results? And it sounds stern. The funny thing about it is it's way less stressful because precisely because it's not existential. There's either growth or there is not.
Right, and it's not, and it's funny because it's almost just more about there's a sense in which and if there's not, there's really no moral judgment to that. It's just today was the day you didn't water your plants.
Yes.
It's just and so it's like it's not. It's funny. It's actually much more. You're saying it's very practical practically about the results, but it's not moralization. There's no moralization on results.
No.
It's just like, well, you just didn't.
It's cause and effect.
You just didn't water your plant today.
Yes.
You know,
So
make sure
X
you water
occurred.
it tomorrow
Yes,
if you want.
that's right.
If you want your plant to keep living.
Oh,
you
absolutely.
know.
Absolutely.
And I think now I'm thinking about the word priority, and I think I think I'm starting to realize maybe why it tends to be a almost social signaling or whatever of prioritization, because we have the biggest thing that stands out to me about the word is that I think about it with priority mail. Priority mail. And priority mail gets to be delivered first. Right? That's what priority mail is. It's important, and so it needs to get somewhere quickly or whatever. So there again, it's about this idea of importance, right? And something that gets priority is like somebody who's important, right? They might get priority privileges or whatever. And so I wonder too if this is why if there's something more relational about this and how other people either feel prioritized or they see you prioritizing things, because I think everybody has this sense of like importance and what's important to you and what's, because a lot of times the only people who love each other want, let's say they want, their, cousin to prioritize something because they know that there are certain things to that cousin that are important to the cousin. And so their only language is to say like, well, make sure that's still important to you. And so they use the language of priority.
Right.
Are you prioritizing, and, you hear a lot of people be like, well, if it was really important to you, you would prioritize it. Right. That's a very common phrase that I've heard.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that it comes from such a good place. But the problem with that is this idea of now creating some, like you're saying, almost this, you're kind of almost wanting to get into the person's head and make sure that they still think it's important.
Yes.
And a lot of that is very distracting. It's very disheartening, and it ends up being it can even be demoralizing. All in the name of this moralization of like priority and accomplishments and goals and being happy.
Absolutely.
And making sure the things that are important to you are still important to you.
Yes, it is socially destructive.
Yeah.
The other thing too, like for example, I stress it is not clear what it means to prioritize something. If you do writing for 15 minutes a day, is that prioritizing writing? Some people say 50 minutes is nothing. Other people go, oh yeah, it's because you're doing it every single day. It's very open. It's very relative. And therefore it can create existential uncertainty. But if instead you simply ask the question, you go, okay, I only have time to write 15 minutes a day. Yeah. But if I were to do that every single day, for 15 minutes, I could have a compounding effect, and I could get to where I wanted to go, and I could do what I wanted to do. The other thing that's so bad is when you don't have a society that thinks in terms of compounding. Not only would you avoid all the existential tension, but you also often don't appreciate how much you can actually get done in a year. We very often, there's a saying, and I can't quite recall it, but there's a saying where we always overestimate what we can get done in a day and underestimate what we can get done in a year. And I thought
you were gonna say the Liam Neeson quote.
Oh yeah, well that's one of them. Yeah, where the
days are long, but the years are short.
Yeah, that's a funny one as well.
A funny one.
We're very bad at overestimating on a short time horizon. We tend to overestimate what we can do on a short time horizon and underestimate what we can do on a longer time horizon.
It's kind of like when you say to yourself like, well, I'm going to clean the whole house today.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. But you could clean, one room, another room, and then by the end of the week you've done it. Which one of the things that gets people in trouble is they always think in terms of cleaning the whole house today, and then 3 months go by and they haven't cleaned anything because they've been paralyzed by the size of their idea. And I would argue that prioritization absolutely tends to go in the direction of big ideas.
Exactly.
Because you're trying to signal to other people that you care about something. So you make these giant visions, or you promise these giant things, and you yourself think these big things because I'm going to prove that I care about X, Y, and Z, and then nothing gets done. And then they're mad. Then they're mad at you again because you didn't prioritize. So you make a bigger vision of what you're going to get done, or you try again, and then it just becomes a vicious spiral. As opposed when you think in terms of compounding, you actually can compound and slowly build up. So you get in a vicious trap, I think, when you try to prioritize as well.
Yeah, the bigness, right? It does remind me of like a big bubble, though.
Oh, sure.
It's there's something about it that can feel very. That's what I'm talking about with this kind of emptiness, because you're almost having to always like, the bigger it gets to kind of prove, it's actually more empty space inside.
Absolutely.
You know,
It's more performative.
yeah, exactly, and really all you're really doing then is making this illusion and not making anything that you want to make. Like, say you want to write whatever, you know, you want to write a collection of poems, you want to write whatever, you know, it's just like that's not what's getting done now. It's more this facade of like, I care. You know.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I do think that, and maybe it just comes from a deep sense of people want to know that they are cared about or something.
Sure.
I mean, I think this happens in relationships where people want to feel prioritized.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, every person desires, you know, a deep and profound love and care and attention.
Right.
And so I think that the frustration can feel like, well, I just, you know, people can feel the sense of well, I just want to know, like, I just like to know that I'm a priority or something like that. Or, you know.
Oh, sure.
But it's the funny thing is that would just be, I don't want to say lip service, but just to say, I don't know, maybe, I'm not sure. I wonder if somebody's like, well, I just like to hear it, you know? But the thing is like, well, what's the substance of that? What's the reality? What's the little things day in and day out that actually materialize somebody being cared for, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, you get a few things. So, you know, there's a difference between wanting to feel like a priority and being a priority. And, you know, when one wants to feel like they're prioritized, that's when you can start getting a kind of good works doctrine. Well, I want to feel prioritized, therefore you'll do X, Y, and Z, and that can be dangerous. At the same time, the question becomes, if somebody commits their life to you, did they mean it? Because if they meant it, then that commitment becomes the grounds of a permanent priority, that way you're a permanent priority. But then, of course, people, you know, that you want to feel that you are prioritized and that you are affirmed, which is not inherently bad, but the danger of the language of prioritization is because it can become idealistic. You know, for example, another reason why the language of priority is so dangerous is because I would argue that the high majority of people's lives, especially as they get more and more responsibilities, are things that force themselves to be prioritized, like a leaky sink, or grass growing, or kids needing to eat, or money. You know, you're being forced to think about things from the external world. But like the skunks that decided to run under our house, which was unbelievable. It's just absolutely staggering. But the language of prioritization can make it sound like you live in a kind of blank canvas where you just every morning, you know, pull out your list of these are the things I want to do in the order I want to do them, and this is all perfectly a replication of my will and desires. And so therefore anyone can come along and look at the order of events you did in the day and have an accurate understanding of your will and wants because they match on one-to-one perfectly with real life. And it's so ridiculous when you put it that way, but that is indeed how people act, you know, when they're emotional or they're upset or they're worried or different things.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I think too it's interesting because I have not ever seen or personally felt the concept of priorities as helpful.
No,
as helpful because of these ideas of, you know, it really can, how to say this? It tends to only make one feel bad, you know, and the sense of oh well, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm just simply not doing enough, and then also the idea of the practical things of, oh, it's actually okay if I just do a little bit each day. It's okay.
Absolutely. Exactly. And it's not a very helpful language at all because, one, because people feel like they can kind of judge your values and wills and wants. You know, two, you have to make tough choices constantly about what you're going to do at one point and what not. And if someone comes along, say, you know, you decided to
please make it about the clown costume.
You know, you made a tough choice where you wanted to wear the clown costume from episode 22 or whatever. And you know, and you let your wife wear that clown costume. You know, and you're prioritizing her. But the next day you don't let her wear that clown costume because the neighbors thought there was something strange, but does that mean you're not prioritizing her desire to do the clown costume? You did it yesterday, but if you really loved her, you'd do it today, right? So, who decides what constitutes a prioritization? Can you really read somebody's soul based on the use of that clown costume or different things like that? So because we know Michelle loves clown costumes. But no, it becomes a very destructive thing, because the other thing I was going to say on it is it does not appreciate the virtue of sacrifice. And what I mean by that, for example, I don't do photography like I used to do with the business and different things like that.
Frozen glory.
Frozen glory, that's right, different things. But you have to make choices
Right.
in your life. Does that mean I don't prioritize photography? I sacrificed photography in order to make space for other things. I like to think there can be a virtue and a maturity in understanding that you can't be all things at all times, and that you have to decide that you are not going to do X instead of Y. Is it true in a sense that you therefore prioritize, say, running the venue side or writing or the family over photography? Yes, that word would be appropriate in that context, but it suggests that I don't care about photography. That's the problem. Prioritization suggests that you don't care about the things you're not prioritizing, when that could be very cruel.
Yeah.
When really it could be a sacrifice, it could be realism, it could be maturity to say not try to be running a photography business, and to make it sound like, oh, you just stopped doing it because you don't care about it anymore, really betrays the perhaps emotional or the maturity or the difficulty or the sacrifice that may come in that. So the language of prioritization also doesn't have very good space for seeing sacrifice as a virtue.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think that's a really great point. I think too, with the compounding work or whatever, when we were talking about this idea a little bit, see that this would be interesting to think about how it relates to, we were talking about contingencies.
Yeah.
The thing with compounding work is that a lot of times it's something you can do yourself when you get a chance
when you get
to do
your
it.
15 minutes.
Right,
Yeah,
when you get your 15 minutes, you do it. And this builds, and you can build something that then can become a very sustainable thing, whether economically or just, for the sake of your sanity,
Yes,
or,
absolutely.
for just, higher visions and projects,
Absolutely.
Whereas, like, priority, it, to me, strikes me as contingent in a sense.
Oh, you have to have a structure that validates your priority.
Yes, exactly. And the contingency is often in its approval, or
Yes.
if it, is it being proved? Is it approved of?
Yes.
And how is it being proved?
Absolutely.
Whereas, never mind if it's actually like all of those are being done well in quality. It's
right.
almost like much more about, in a sense, quality, almost like a box is being checked off. Again, like
absolutely.
a badge. There's
Yeah.
something just much more on the, I would say superficial, but there's something that can be superficial about it.
It can be.
Whereas the baby steps compounding work is it's not reliant on those things at all, actually.
No.
It just waits. It kind of just continues to gestate and grow in small, tiny little increments until one day it's finished.
Oh, yeah.
Let's say it's a book. And, books, we're always editing stuff.
Sure.
And, there's always still continual work for things like that. But, you kind of got the substance together.
Oh, sure.
And it's done. And it's not, there's less contingency, but there's so much more freedom in that. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it should be noted, again, there is a sense where if you spend 15 minutes a day on your entrepreneurship or whatever, that you are quote-unquote prioritizing it. But the problem is, you almost want to say that when you're thinking in terms of compounding, you also get prioritization.
Absolutely.
But if you focus on prioritization, you might not get compounding.
Exactly.
So it's the first things first, second things second.
Absolutely,
as well.
because, there's still... If we think about prioritization in terms of just valuation,
Right.
then of course you're still going to end up doing it anyways. It's just kind of
This emphasis.
the emphasis, right?
The
emphasis and the language and the social
schema that constructs around it.
Exactly. Because a lot of times, you're thinking about getting stuff done from institutional settings like school and
'cause
work.
that's what
and
you've absorbed.
yeah, exactly. So it's and then it's funny because actually often the stuff that is compounding, that's every day, every day doing dishes, every day doing sweeping, it's like, wow, all of that just never really gets talked about. You might participate in like home chores or something like that, but it's not really the focus of discussion in, school or institutions, And so it's interesting because I feel like I think that really does, that's why I think this topic is important too, though, Daniel, because if we think about the compounding work, it is often the kind of quotidian, day in, day out, sometimes overlooked stuff that then actually, goes into like, I don't know, building a home or,
a few things. I mean, what you're bringing up is very important. So first, when you think in terms of compounding, like if we're talking about the writing example, it is very possible for you to randomly, dare I say, or maybe, or to fit in, say, 15 minutes of writing every single day. And if your goal is to do those 15 minutes and to have a compounding return, because one sentence goes to 2 sentences, 3 sentences, so on, and then by the end of the week you have a stanza of a poem or something like that, well, then you can very visually see that you're getting there. And so your metric for having achieved compounding is the compounding work is right there. The stanza is done. But you can kind of fit that in, right? You've got it's not so contingent. But when you're prioritizing, if it becomes the social function, well, it tends to almost always fall into the social script, which would say be 8 hours at a job, and it would be going somewhere or working on Zoom where people can confirm and they're seeing you do it. And there's a lot more things that go on to it. Well, that's a lot more things that have to be arranged.
Yep.
That's a lot more variables that have to fall into place and a lot more time that has to be carved out. Well, if you're, say, if you're made to feel that you're not actually truly doing something you don't prioritize, well, then you're never going to write. You're never going to do any artistic endeavors, because usually almost always that starts in an isolated, alone room that cannot be validated. And two, you've been made to feel as if, unless you carve out that giant amount of time, which then will have to be in the middle of the day, and say if you have kids or family, that has to be arranged around it. Well, the variables can't be fit together without, like, incredible stress. It's not going to happen. So what you're going to do is just not write. You're just not going to do it because you're not going to be able to fit it together. I mean, there's a lot of, like, when you think in terms of priorities, and therefore you have to fit into a social structure, the likelihood of you being able to do of these different things that you want to do is very, very low, simply because you can't time allocate in a manner that would be appropriate. If you say, I want to be a writer, but you're made to feel that you're not truly trying unless you give it 3 hours a day, where are you going to find those 3 hours?
Well, and also, right, and like you're saying too, if it also only counts if, like, you're doing it outside of your home, or you're doing it at some, like, writers' conference.
There's contingencies.
Yeah, not that there's anything wrong with writing outside of your home or writers' conferences, but it's just interesting because the idea, it's just so crazy because, like you're saying, there's no social double thumbs up to the compounding work, and yet it's extremely substantive over time. Oh, yes. And so, and also, like you're saying, I mean, I think about, we were talking a little bit about this. I mean, I think about it too a lot as a mother. It's really, for me, it's really helpful to have this conversation to understand this idea of compounding, because it's very exciting, actually, to know that, hey, I can still do some of my other creative pursuits on top of the creative. I do think mothering is a creative pursuit as well, and really a privilege and something you get to participate in. So there's that. That's going to be the priority. Actually, it's funny thinking about priorities now. It's like, well, obviously children take the priority because they're living beings.
Yes.
Who I'm trying to help survive and thrive.
Well, so you put it very well. They take the priority. So then, if you're made to feel like you have to prioritize things, you don't get to. They took your priority.
Exactly, so. And that's okay.
That's fine.
That's what.
But then, if you have a social structure that's making you feel like there's something wrong, then you can't win.
Well, and it doesn't help that we have kind of like an anti-children society, like in general. I mean, that's another topic for another time. Sure. But there can be a sense of like, well, you should be using your gifts and talents,
right.
And for some strange reason, that doesn't include being a mother somehow,
And birth rates are collapsing.
Yeah. Yes. And it's just so. Anyways, I think we need to remember that being a mother is. I'm not trying to like pat myself on the back or something that, but I think there's something very essential to a society and a culture in mothers, fathers, families.
It's hard to
That's
find.
Why we're here.
It is hard to find a civilization that did not make a point to praise mothers, precisely because they understood that was such an incredibly difficult and important task. And you could say, oh, well, they put too much emphasis on it. Well, maybe, but precisely the difficulty of the task was a reason why you put emphasis on it from a praise standpoint. And I think there are now content where you have in the West just collapsing birth rates.
Yeah, that's a really good book by Mary Eberstadt up there.
Yeah.
So it's like something like Home Alone or something like that.
Yeah.
Really good book. I was one of I love her books. Mary
Yeah.
Aberstadt's books. Anyways, but yeah, the point of the matter is, though, is just, it's so wild because you're actually doing a whole lot with your gifts and talents to have to train children and take care of them. And I mean, you're doing, I guess what I mean is like, I think you think about it, it's like literally like many different roles that you're playing out.
Yes.
So you're doing a whole lot. And again, I'm not trying, it's just to say that it's really funny how we sort of give some things a stamp of approval and other things we don't. You know, and a lot of that again has to do with the social script. It has to do with the things that you can kind of point to a paper and say I did this, or you can say I went there. Da da da. Suddenly, you know, it's like we can't overlook the things that are done in the quiet, in the behind closed doors, in the homes and stuff like that.
Well,
all that work that's the compounding stuff.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
That's the compounding
that
stuff.
That tends to be the compounding stuff.
It is. It's not like very showy in a sense.
Generally, it would seem as if the social order, rather in this case, capitalism, corporatism, whatever you want to call it, it seems to like the language of priority, because that seems to lend itself in the direction of delusion capture by the system, whereas compounding and building something could be a threat to the system, or it could be alternative, or it's not easily controlled by the social script, because like you say, you're doing it, you go up into your room and shut the door, you know, and be with your father. And so there's something that does seem to be about prioritization that the system, quote-unquote, likes, because priorities tend to more reflect social scripts and tend to more align with mechanisms of approval that in order to get, you have to fall in line with the system. Now, we don't want to say that systems are all bad, and we don't want to say you want to live without institutions, but there's always a dialectical bothness that has to be maintained. And always both sides of the dialectic are trying to destroy the other side. That's why it's so hard to maintain it. It's very difficult for, say, capitalism, which is arguably good because it solves your coordination problem and your knowledge problem from a von Mises or a Hayek. But it's very difficult for capitalism to not then overreach and become an ideological moral system that then makes you think in a manner that supports it in a bad way, and then it becomes like cancerous, just like Alex Ebert will talk about. So, you know, that's what's quite difficult. But it does seem as if prioritization, the language of priority, precisely because there's a social validation there, and precisely because you are living in a society that's structured by capitalism, there does seem to be something about prioritization that capitalism likes, that works against compounding work that is compounding. So then people don't think in terms of compounding work. They think in terms of proving their priorities, which means going to X job every single day and showing if you could go to the job and sit there and not do anything. But by going, you have shown that you prioritize it. Well, you know, that you value education because you read the top 10 books on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller. All of them are nonsense, but you're proving that you value reading because you buy those books and you have them in your house. This is my point, you can performatively prove priority every day of the week and actually have no fruit.
Exactly.
And have no fruit at all.
Absolutely.
But I think capitalism likes that because you get the social script, but you're not making any substance, so you're no threat. Like if people were like compounding things and building things and actually had substance, well, then they might be a threat to the system. Which then, of course, problematically, people can go too far and then destroy the system entirely without any idea of what to replace it with, and then you get a sort of Tocqueville or Burke situation where that makes everything worse. But there is something about you get performance without substance.
Yeah, and that was so good, Daniel. And I think, let me not poke myself in the eye. I already have like the threat of that with the kids all the time.
No, it's terrible.
Remember the eye patch time in September?
Yeah, it was like Kill Bill. It was great, that character.
I was Kill Bill.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically, like to your point, we talked about how the compounding work is, there's less contingencies, right?
Yes.
To do it, you don't have to rely on the boss telling you to do it, or that you're getting paid for it, or blah blah blah. It's just you're just gonna do it when you get that 15 minutes to go to that example.
Yes.
That's self-sustaining. That's self-reliability.
Yes.
And that's also a threat to the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely it is.
And there's almost a way in which there's something this is not like let's burn down the system talk. This is that we have to have a dialect. The system has to be able to be dialectical.
All systems overreach.
Yes. Exactly.
All religions overreach. All values overreach. Right. Everything has an overreaching tendency that has to be actively fought against so that there's a dialectical balance.
Yeah. So it's like system and self-reliance need to have a chat, constantly.
Yes.
And But the risk with system with no dialect is that it detests self-reliance.
Absolutely.
Because it's like, well, no, you can't do that. And no, that's not real work. And no, that's not, you're not prioritizing anything because you're just taking 15 minutes,
because you can only prioritize in the system.
Right. And this was like, Javier shared a recent talk that was really good on his Instagram live on like ambition and how people view ambition and stuff. And it's very interesting because a lot of the prioritization mindset only sees one as ambitious in these types of socially accepted priorities.
That's right.
Right? And so you're made to feel like you're kind of made to feel like you're like not an ambitious person.
That's right.
If you're going to do this very kind of slow, steady, compounding work that's not showy, that nobody gets to kind of give their, they don't look at it and give a stamp of approval because they don't understand it. It's very hard to understand incremental work because you don't see the whole of what it is.
Yes.
So most people just write it off as nothing, but it's not nothing.
Yes.
And you are doing it consistently, and it's very substantive because it's a practice that actually also shapes you, and you're building whatever you're working on something, and you're working toward that. So anyways, I just want to say it's interesting because a lot of the ambition talk, it's almost like, but for what? Are you actually becoming like a fuller human being? And it's like almost like the true ambition of this compounding work is overlooked or thought of as unambitious, which could be, from like a different perspective, actually the most ambitious thing you can do.
Well, a few things. What ends up happening is ambition is defined in a manner that cannot be a threat to the system, but in fact supports the system. So that's fantastic for the system. It loves that.
Yes.
Two, if you do compounding work, you're not intelligible. So that's good in the sense you can avoid delusion and capture. But it also can be a threat it can also be difficult because it's difficult to comprehend. The people around you simply have to trust. And trust is hard, and trust is existential, and it's unlikely that you will except people notably close to you, people who will extend you that trust. And arguably, you can't blame people who don't know you to think you're not doing anything because they don't know you, right? So you also have to have some level of security in your compounding work to expect and be able to handle some resistance that you're going to get, because it's natural that some people won't give you, all the trust that maybe they should give you, but they may not. So that's another issue. Another reason why compounding work can be difficult to do, but also good to do, is because it does have to teach you the ability to some degree to affirm yourself. And there's nothing wrong with affirmation, but there can be something bad about affirmation if you're dependent on affirmation. But of course, that's everything. You can be dependent on finding your identity and reading books and not knowing how to interact with people who don't read books, right? And then you can't talk with them, and that's not good. But you can also get dependent on, being around people. Everything can be a drug. It's hard to think of anything that can't be a drug or overly done. Because
clown costumes.
Yeah,
there's your answer.
Yeah, that's right. That's a Platonic form. Yeah, that's a Platonic form. No, it's a Platonic form. So there's a good thing in that. The thing with the compounding work, also, that is so important is, I was going to say, compounding work by definition has to have substance to it, because it's not compounding if there's no substance to it. It's not growing. Whereas it's very possible to have priorities and not have growth and not have any substance to it, because priority can just be performance. But compounding cannot be performance. It's either compounding or it is not. So it in of itself, by making that your metric, here's the thing. When you make, is this growing or not? Am I doing the work or not? Am I making this compound or not? It is a very undebatable metric. It's a very hard metric that kind of reflects on you and makes you be serious or not. Whereas performative, it can be all over the place. Prioritization, it can be all over the place. You go, people think I'm performing. I'm doing enough of the work to get the task done. You're not excelling in it, but you're getting it done. It's a much more mixed metric. And so that in of itself, whenever you have mixed metrics, you just tend to have less valid results. And then, of course, the big thing that's crazy is that if you look or value compounding work, there's, because we mentioned the mother example. Well, if you're made to feel like you don't prioritize work or what you're knowledgeable about unless you get a career and therefore prove your prioritization, then you're made to feel like you have to choose as a woman between children, work, and different things like that. And that puts you an incredible amount of existential stress and anxiety on women. Whereas if a woman is able to value, or people would find value in compounding work that they can get done in 15 minutes when they have time, or different areas, or maybe late in the evening when at different, well, then that would go a long way to helping what feminism strives toward achieving, which is a feeling where women are able to excel in all those different areas and are not made to feel like no matter what they do, they're losing. The double shift talk of Hofstadter, not Hofstadter, but the woman who wrote that book, The Second Shift. It's actually what's terrible is thinking in terms of compounding work could go a long way to a positive feminism, a good feminism, to achieving those goals. That is not included because honestly, a lot of feminism has been captured by capitalism. The values of feminism become very similar to the values of capitalism. You have succeeded if you've done well in capitalism, and so it gets captured, and it doesn't even consider options of compounding work that would be very positive for those projects.
Well, yeah, positive because it's freedom. Right,
yes,
that's if you want, for women to have more freedom and empowerment, if you will, then this is a wonderful tool to find that freedom, and to really exercise it in a sense, because now you realize that I actually my multiple dreams and goals and visions are actually compatible. They can be compatible. Yes. I can do them both. I think we just have to learn to accept this. The compounding and the value of the slow and steady, right? The small and steady, if you will.
Absolutely.
But it's actually interesting because from a creative from a perspective of someone who likes to create and also loves being a mother, it's like there's something that's so in tandem about those two ideas, actually, because children grow there's just this very incremental little growth each day, and then suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, how did they get to be so tall, and it's a similar thing with you when you do compounding work with writing or whatever. You're like, oh, it's just like a little bit here and there, and then you're like, oh my gosh, wow, I collected this many audio recordings on stuff or whatever, this many poems or what. So it's pretty neat. And one of the last things I probably want to say on the topic is, I brought up about priority mail. Well, I think the risk too with the priority mindset is there's such an urgency, that priority mail has to get there fast, right? I said that. Well, I think that's the risk too, is prioritization gets this kind of like, you kind of have to frantically, urgently prove and frantically, urgently do. Otherwise, it means you don't care. Like you have to do it now and not like in a year, because if you do it in a year, it means you really just don't care, And it's like, well, why? Like in the grand scheme of your life, you'll still be doing some of the things you maybe want to do. Why do we think of it in such a short-term urgency, priority mail type of feeling, when it's like the compounding and the growth is really what life is actually more like anyways, right? And that type of mindset, I think is once again not, it's there's a less of that urgency, the rush. You realize that life goes through different seasons too, Like say you really love to travel, but you might not be able to do a lot of traveling in your current responsibilities. Lord willing, you'll have a chance to do that. You may get to do that one day. Does it mean you don't prioritize traveling? Well, maybe not. Not right now. But It doesn't mean you don't care about it.
Well, the horror is, why can't there be a nobility in that?
And that's to your sacrifice point, right? It's like there are times when you sacrifice, things you prioritized in the past because you have other priorities that take your priority, and that's okay. And that's okay. They take priority, right? And that's okay. That's a very, like I said, there's something about that I think we need to make place for this and have conversation to it. Otherwise, people either who are doing it can feel very underappreciated. I don't want to say underappreciated, but basically not seen in what they're doing. And then another thing is that then there's people who just won't choose it because they'll just think it's just not being. I will not be prioritizing if I do that type of, sacrificing, basically.
Well, if everyone has to prove to one another that they prioritize this, that, and so forth, then everything's going to be crazy all the time. And there's going to be a lot of potential drama constantly and unhappiness, rather on the individual level or the social level. All the language of prioritization seems to do is contribute to atmospheres of drama and confusion. we talked about trust. One of the best things in the world is just simply to trust that people are doing the best they can and that they do care, and to give people that freedom.
Yeah.
And to not accuse people of different things based on, how they use their time, because we tend to, frankly, we tend to interpret how people use their time, other people use their time, in a manner that's not very kind, whereas we tend to be very kind to ourselves in how we use our own time.
Right.
We tend to be very understanding of ourselves, but not of other people. And unfortunately, prioritization, that language just feeds into that tendency, which can be very problematic. And again, this is not to say that one cannot, if they enjoy a certain job somewhere that fits into a social system that helps them achieve what they want to achieve and do what they want to do, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But by not even having the schema of compounding language, of that possibility, which can open doors to different people and open different avenues where they could find healthier ways of life, or ways of life that where they can do the writing and take care of the kids and also take care of the farm or whatever, and feel like they're doing all of those things. But if one of those doesn't count, well, then you've got an existential, a source of existential tension. So it opens up possibilities for people. But the current schema of prioritization doesn't even allow you to think that. So opening that up to think about that, I think, is very important.
For some reason, the compounding reminds me of more Eastern practices.
It could.
I
The
don't know.
repetition, the regularity,
the small,
the
regular,
meditation. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it just whereas the prioritization. I mean, I don't know. There's just something that feels a bit more.
Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes. I mean, again, if by prioritization we meant the ability in a decision-making environment to do what we needed to do quickly, that's fine, but that's not what people tend to mean. It tends to become a value system.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing that happens is there's a lot of emphasis on what you do in the priority language schema. There's a lot of emphasis on what you do till when you're 25. And then you prioritize your career, you prioritize your major. There's all this priority language, and decide what you're going to do and what your focus is. Then you make a decision, and then it's just kind of this open space of time where you participate in that prioritization until you retire. And it's kind of this weird way where your early life is a big deal and your later life is a big deal. Where when you think in terms of compounding, you view that middle age space as really important. And I mean, there's so much you can do in 30 years.
Oh, yeah.
That you're not even allowed to think. You're not even allowed to think it, because you go to college, you get your job, and you prioritize, and you just live that prioritization. And so the other thing that does happen, to what you were saying, Michelle, is that the system and the institutions kind of train you to not use your time in a way that can be compounding.
Exactly.
But instead simply to express your priorities.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I mean, there's just, and that's why I think it's, again, this topic is interesting, and, I think it's definitely been helpful for me and for us to discuss it further, is that it just opens up so many possibilities. I think we forget that we can actually also
accomplish a lot.
Yeah, like we can accomplish a lot. I mean, it's just very exciting because there's so much that can be accomplished.
Yes.
It doesn't have
from
to...
a compounding mindset.
It's not going to, Rome, we know that expression, it's like Rome wasn't built in a day.
It was built in 2 days. That's what, exactly.
So it's just like, well, that's right, it wasn't built in a day, but you can put down a brick. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of hope that can be that can be restored in understanding the compounding concept.
Oh, I definitely think that the prioritization mindset actually hurts hope. Because all you're doing is expressing the priority, improving the priority. You're not necessarily going anywhere. You're not necessarily doing anything. You're just, right. I mean, you could, it depends, but it can simply be a recapitulation of an already. And so that can work against hope.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I mean, another way to just kind of, offer one more metaphor for it. I can prioritize, if we're just thinking the stock market, because that's an obvious example with the word compound, with interest rates and so on. I can prioritize the stock market by simply going and reading about it and learning about it and so on and so forth, but my account may not grow at all, and I may lose money. Yeah. I'm prioritizing the stock market. But if instead I ask the question, am I compounding?
Yep.
Then I ask if my account is growing. Which, if it's not, then maybe I'm not learning the right things. Maybe I'm not reading the right things. Maybe I'm not doing the right things. So compounding, in a sense, compounding actually, I don't know how you figure out what to prioritize without a compounding mindset, frankly. Because what's your metric?
Exactly.
Like that's, what you're saying, if you compound, you can also prioritize, but if you prioritize, you may not compound and lose both. Like, how do you know what to prioritize if you're ultimately not thinking a compounding mindset?
Yeah, exactly.
You don't really have a good way to determine what you should read, what you shouldn't read, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. It becomes very difficult to make decisions in the micro, in the immediate. Because if your account isn't growing, like again with the stock, then you must not be reading the right things. You must not have the right strategy. So you pivot. I mean, if you're writing fiction every day and your ability to describe a room is not improving, then is not getting better, well, then you need to change. You have a sense of what you need, how you need to shift, what you need to do, in order to get the development and to get to the place where you need to get to.
Right.
So the funny thing is that when you put all your focus on prioritization, I would argue that a reason you get such existential anxiety in the prioritization schema is precisely because you don't know what to prioritize. You don't know how to prioritize. You don't know how to improve. So if you can't be sure how to improve, how do you even know if you're prioritizing? What is your concrete reality to confirm to you that you're prioritizing? Well, you don't know. Because the metric of prioritization does not tell you. And so you're just in this uncertainty land. This endless uncertainty land. Whereas if your metric is compounding, well, then you can know if you're prioritizing well. You can know if you are prioritizing what you need to prioritize and should. So that's the great joke, is unfortunately when the emphasis is on prioritization, you don't even know how to do it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Spot on.
But anyway, for more by OG Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Anchor, Twitter, Instagram, all these places where we're trying to compound. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.